I think this keeps on going till the year end. And one should be, the stress for people here should not be, are we going to pull back, but should be, am I long enough?
Welcome to Bits and Bips, exploring how crypto and macro collide, one basis point at a time. I'm your host, James Stapert, TradFi Archmaester, Lord of Bloomberg's End. Here with Alex Kruger Macro of House Asgard, Protector of the Realm. We're here to discuss the latest stories in the worlds of crypto and macro news. Just remember that nothing we say here is investment advice. Please check unchainedcrypto.com/bitsandbips for more disclosures. Today, we're also joined by two people. First, Noelle Acheson, High Seer and Keeper Now newsletter. Also joining us is Ahluwalia, Maester of Wealth, leader of Lumina.
Today's episode is brought to you by Gemini, a US-based crypto exchange built for new and advanced traders. Gemini is offering new customers $15 in BTC when they trade. Sign up today to earn your Bitcoin.
If you want, Noelle, why don't you just give, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, just give a quick background on who you are in 20 seconds, and then we can dive into this after Ram gives his quick background.
Okay, 20 seconds. Good thing I'm Irish because the Irish speak very fast. So here we go. I come from TradFi, 13 years in TradFi, 10 years in TradFi, 13 years running an e-commerce company I founded, fell into crypto 2014, worked for CoinDesk for 5 years, set up their research team, did the same for Genesis Trading, left in 2022 to focus on what I really care about, which is how the crypto ecosystem is impacting the macro landscape. And that's what I do now. I write the Crypto is Macro Now newsletter on Substack.
Yeah, that's good enough. Ram, why don't you give a quick background?
I'll be brief. I'm Ram Ahluwalia. I lead Lumina Wealth. We're a private wealth management firm. We focus on cross-asset class investing. We work with a lot of exited founders and crypto natives, and been in the investing business for a long time.
All right, let's get into it. Red wave in that election, Bitcoin pumping. I mean, one of my takes that I've told most of my friends was that if Trump wins, we're going to take out the inflation-adjusted all-time high in Bitcoin, and we got pretty damn close. I think the number 77, 78 would be the all-time high if you inflation adjust. Everything's pumping in the crypto world. I mean, every like honestly, my view is if you are invested in a stock or some sort of crypto and it didn't pump over the last 24 hours, you should probably reconsider or understand what's going on there. But I don't know if you guys, what your guys' thoughts are before we dive too deep into what we saw.
Huge surprise. Obviously, a welcome surprise when it comes to crypto. We have to, of course, remember that crypto is not the only thing that voters care about, but definitely good news for the crypto ecosystem. Of course, there's the risk that crypto's expectations run away from themselves. Shocker, never happened before, because we're not necessarily going to get the regulation we are hoping for on day one. We're not necessarily going to even get it perhaps within the first year. So expectations perhaps need a little bit of tempering. That said, just even replacing the chief of the SEC would be good enough.
Yeah, we have a change in character and trend in the market, right? The market topped out after the meme coin craze, and that was in the spring of this past year. It's bottomed out, and now we have a series of higher lows. So that is a change in market character. So, you got to approach this asset class differently. I think it's going to help names like Uniswap, for example. Imagine if you got a token that can flip on the fee switch and you can issue a dividend to an investor, or it can do buybacks. I think those kinds of ideas will work well. I think momentum assets will work well also. I think you're going to see the IPO market open up. I think the IPO market just opened up today. The vibe session is over today, by the way, too. It's psychology. It's just psychology. At least it did for 52% of Americans, right? Because yesterday it was 100% in vibe session. Now it's 52% or not. And the IPO markets open up. I think we'll see Circle IPO. I think you might see a Chainalysis IPO. And that's going to be...
Sorry, quick question for you.
Yeah.
When would you think, if you have any estimate, out of curiosity, I don't.
Q1, you think that quick?
Q1.
Oh, for Circle, okay. I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm not sure. The IPO market, Q1. I think CoreWeave goes public Q1, and that's relevant because they have a commercial agreement with Core Scientific, right? A lot of these Bitcoin miners are repositioning as AI plays, and that's going to liquefy the venture capital markets, both for traditional VCs, like let's say Stripe goes public, but also for crypto VCs who need to pay out distributions. And so that reinvigorates the ecosystem. Now, when that IPO happens, when it's time to look for the exit, by the way, remember Coinbase IPO April 2021. By the way, they were approved to go IPO 3 days before Gensler took his chair seat.
That was at the point where we all thought Gensler might be like a somewhat pro-crypto commissioner too, remember? So things changed rather quickly.
Right. We thought he would bridge the gap and be Anakin Skywalker, and that did not happen.
How nice would it be to have the market top when Circle IPOs?
No,
like
so later. We want it to be later.
Yeah.
Not then. We also have to remember that if, and this is an if still, if we do get some clarity over what kind of disclosures are needed for token issuance, then there's a different type of IPO market that can start to emerge. People actually going back to issuing tokens with the full disclosures the rules require to raise for innovative projects. Innovation got a very big bump.
I 100% agree. It's a fantastic point. Like, you can get a disclosure regime that helps investors make better decisions, people have been asking for. And now we can start tokenizing digital assets on chain and music royalties, which I'm very excited about, and start broadening the cultural relevance of digital assets. Fun fact, one of the number 1 or number 2 apps downloaded yesterday was Polymarket. The other one was Kashi. That's product market fit, and it's working the way it's supposed to. The end user doesn't even know it's powered by digital assets. It's like TCP/IP for the internet. And the irony is that it's an app that's used to, one, speculate, on two, policy and regulation. You can't make that up, right? Talk about.
I have a feeling that was the peak, though, for a little while for both of those.
Oh yeah,
I think the peak product market fit. We might wait for 4 years before they top those numbers again.
Yes, I think you're right.
I gotta say, actually, I think users knowing that they're dealing with crypto in the back end, we actually want that to happen. Like, there's a lot of examples where users are using crypto and they're not aware of it. And what happens is that money doesn't flow into the crypto ecosystem and it doesn't circulate and it doesn't really bring much value. You can even think of, there's many cases of this, like, for example, the famous Reddit NFTs on Polygon. They were quite huge and they didn't do anything. So this I think we actually do want, I'm stressing this because it's something that we say a lot in crypto, that how great would it be that everybody using blockchain in the back and not being aware. And I think it's the opposite. We want them to be aware and take control of those assets and have awareness.
Fair enough. One other point should have raised is, like, look, you're going to get stablecoin policy and regulation, and that's a use case a lot of people can relate to. That bill has been stalled. It's got bipartisan support. So I think we'll see that. And to your point, Alex, people on the front end at the app level will start to, engage in these transactions.
Yeah, and the branding, in the end, it comes down to branding. I think you're right, Alex. I always was of the camp where we don't want people to talk about it. We just want them to use it. But the branding could certainly use a boost. But then the question is, what branding? Do we want crypto to be associated? Is it blockchain or is it digital assets? I mean, what kind of branding do we want?
I like digital asset. You got to make this mainstream.
I like that. That's the term I use in a lot of my writing, personally speaking. But I also have a lot of more restrictions.
Because it encompasses stable coins. And the crypto will always be that you'll always have a fairly substantial faction that is associated with the criminals and the fraud and everything, unfortunately and unfairly. But that is still the case. I mean, does Bitcoin become a digital asset or is it a cryptocurrency?
Both, all of the above, in my opinion.
I think it depends on the audience. I actually am very attached to the word crypto. TradFi and politics, you say digital assets, that's the brand, but you turn around and you talk about crypto. There's a lot of things that happen there. They're not really suitable for traditional finance peeps, right?
Yeah, and also crypto does still have the privacy connotations that those of us in the industry care about.
Yeah. I mentioned, my expectation was the Trump win, like I said, the inflation adjusted all-time highs, short term. That's a very short-term thing that I thought might happen. The question is, I mean, the market cap of Bitcoin went up like over $100 billion in less than 24 hours. I can't really talk about like tactical moves, but I know Alex can, and I know Ram can, and I'm assuming Noelle can. Like, do you think this is a near-term top? Are you selling some of this, or did you go leverage long into this and take off your leverage? Like, what's your view?
That's the first thing I actually want to stress on. I see a lot of people already talking about getting out of the position or oh, it ran too much, I'm going to short, and a lot of people really talking about taking profit, or concerned that price didn't run up enough. Come on, it's up 9%. What do you expect?
Yeah.
It's just wrong. It's like I've been talking about this all night. In fact, I haven't slept.
What?
So this is my ecstatic face. It's like I'm actually quite ecstatic, but
You're doing pretty
I'm
well for someone
tired.
who hasn't slept. That's amazing.
What's the angry face, Alex? What's that?
Yeah, that's when I have a very bad trade and I have to break it to work. So there's two ways to think about it. I think that are very fundamentally important, and this is really important at the beginning of a trend like this. One is from a technical perspective. We have actually the longest range in forever in Bitcoin. There's a range, which means very well defined range, and which means basically people, when you break the range, they're turning their hedges on and putting positions on the upside, and same on the downside. And we broke to the upside. So when the longer the range, the more one should expect price to run in the direction of the breakout. In this case, higher. That's technically, and fundamentally, this is a seismic change. This is really, really fundamentally an important change for Bitcoin. They're talking about Bitcoin as reserve asset. They're talking about, even just the mention of this is talking about no taxes on Bitcoin in the US. Yeah, probability that happens within 4 years is like 1%, 0.1%, doesn't matter. It's being discussed. It's insane. And the regulatory front, we're going to see a lot of changes coming through. It may be slow, but it's still a massive fundamental change. So we have technicals of fundamentals, this is the place where, at least in my book, you let it run. And if you're wrong and you round trip the whole thing, well, too bad. Shit happens. It's sometimes things go wrong, but that's the play. It's right now is just keeping the reins. What do you guys think?
There is also the, as I mentioned earlier, the risk that we're over expecting the regulatory changes, but longer term, totally agree with you. We're overlooking the macro implications here. A Trump presidency is going to be more inflationary than we have probably priced in right now. Tariffs are inflationary. Deporting immigrants is inflationary because of the impact on wages. Tax cuts are inflationary. So the expectations for rate cuts will adjust. That could also cause some putting a cap on the run, but we're looking at increased spending, especially if the Republicans get the Senate and the House. We're looking at increased spending. We're looking at accelerated currency debasement. We're looking at inflation coming back, and that's the macro tailwinds for Bitcoin, which are going to be very material.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of the comments there. I say, look, the trend is now up, and this will continue until we get an event or set of events where you get peak enthusiasm, and that's ahead of us. Markets have things to look forward to. So it's very tactically in the short term, that's much harder to call. What I do is I have a daily process every morning, and my team and I, we look at how folks are positioned. For example, looking at options data, for example. So I'd want to look at that first thing tomorrow morning. So we did that this morning. We could clearly see people were wrong way positioned. I did a post 2 days ago and again yesterday saying that you don't want to be hedged and you want to be long. And, that's how we are positioned. And so assets are re-rating because of that. But, it's important not to feel the FOMO and just like plunge in the fire if you missed it. I've never seen an asset that doesn't give you another entry point. Like people are talking about copper. Copper is like down today. Okay. Gold is down today. So, there are other entry points that will present themselves. There's a lot of excitement. The other observation I will say is that there's this concept called the hot ball of liquidity. And what that means is markets will re-rate very quickly, reprice, a lot of enthusiasm, a nice parabola shows up. You saw this with China when David Tepper spoke on CNBC. You saw this with Ethereum in May. You've seen this in uranium stocks just a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And now uranium stocks have kind of tumbled out. So the average window of time in which this run-up takes place, where that peak enthusiasm, everyone's trying to get in the market, is around 1 to 2 weeks. That's an interesting rule of thumb to have. Now you got to adapt it for the local situation too, right? So I don't think this is a 2 weeks, probably a little shorter than that in terms of the kind of the near term rally, because it's so the force is so significant. It's pulled forward a bit of that.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. If Trump does even a fraction of the positive things he's saying he was going to do for the space, he's 4 years in office. He puts somebody who's pro crypto, actually makes some rules, set some guidelines for what these companies should and shouldn't be doing. I do think no matter, even if Trump's in office, there are going to be rules that come out that this industry is going to be unhappy with. But I still think it'd be better than the unknowns we currently have. So I don't know. There's a lot of, honestly, even if they just stop doing all the negative antagonistic things that this current admin, the one that's on the way out, was doing, I think it's a net positive for the space. So I mean, it just the positive price momentum makes complete sense to me, no matter how you slice it. I don't think, yeah, it should. So near term pullbacks maybe, but long term it looks extremely positive as far as I'm concerned.
I think medium term up. It's funny. I had a dialogue with an entrepreneur who won't name that person, but the person said, "Look, I want to build and not have to call my lawyer." That's one. And you think about the dollars lost on lawyers and responding to enforcement inquiries. It's been significant without having interpretive guidance from the SEC, meaning there's no rules of the road that have been published during this entire SEC administration while they're claiming that there's clarity. It's so, yeah, I think you're going to see more innovation, more app development. It's an exciting time.
And the, if I may say, marketing factor of all of that. If we start to see some of the wells and the processes being walked back, some of the outstanding lawsuits being walked back, that's low-hanging fruit. That makes headlines. That gets people interested in crypto. If Ross is freed, that makes headlines. That gets people interested. There's going to be a lot of mainstream interest because of what they're seeing across their feeds, as well as because of the dialogues that they'll be having with their friends and family.
You talk about lawyer fees. I mean, I've read more legal documents in relation to the Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. I mean, the lawyers are just raking in cash on what the government is doing right now. I mean, they rail against the government, but they are definitely raking in cash with what they have. But that's talking about rulemaking, and something we've been saying on this podcast for months. The Trump win is more positive for DeFi than it is necessarily for Bitcoin specifically, and some other things. And the price momentum we've seen over the last 24 hours proves it. I mean, you look at Aave, you look at Uniswap, you look at Lido, you look at Athena, you look at all these other like truly DeFi, decentralized finance type applications using cryptocurrency or blockchain, and they're up 20+% in many cases over the last 24 hours, which to me makes a lot of sense. I don't know if you guys have like more complex thoughts other than the fact that it makes sense that they're rallying as much as they are.
I think it's a great point. It's a terrific point. Look, Bitcoin's a commodity that's settled. So changing the SEC really doesn't impact Bitcoin as much. It does help on the banking side because banks can interact with digital assets and custody and serve as a distribution layer and use it as a form of settlement. So there is value creation on that side. But to your point, like in my mind, the two highest use cases for digital assets are one, tokenization. Stablecoins are one instance of that. But the second is DeFi, right? The ability to have trustless settlement with a counterparty and borrow, lend on chain. That's what banks were created for. And to be able to do that without having to have a trust requirement, where you can see the entire ledger and balance sheet on chain and create liquidity on a smart contract that you can audit, I think that's very powerful. And that we have not seen the full potential of that innovation. It's an innovation that I would actually put the level of civilization level innovation, because prior to that, it was banks for millennia. Borrow short, lend long, take deposits, custody, fractional reserve banking. You got to hope that people don't show up at the same time. This is an innovation that would not be possible without digital networks and cryptography, private and public keys. It's something that can only arrive in the modern era. So, yeah, I agree. I think that's very encouraging. I mean, think about like the 2008 crisis. One of the reasons why I'm excited about digital assets, I was at Merrill Lynch in the 2008 crisis. I lived at 45 Wall Street, and we saw these banks blow up because they had illiquid, opaque securities. No one knew what the value of these things were. No one knew, what were in the bonds. You think about the scene from the movie The Big Short where Michael Burry's crawling on the floor trying to figure out the FICO score. Yeah. That's the world we still largely live in, by the way. We still live in that world. And you can move to a world of more transparency, more liquidity, and less counterparty risk.
And especially if you get the cross-border transfers smoother, especially if it becomes easier to spin up new markets in places where they don't have the current infrastructure. Imagine what that will do to the distribution of savings, as well as unlock the financing of innovative projects in areas that currently don't have that kind of activity. But another thing to think about is, again, what kind of products will we see emerge? I imagine, James, you have a lot more coming your way in terms of ETF legal documents, because the question I've had many times today is, what's the next ETF that gets approved, assuming there is a change of regime at the SEC, which is safe to assume? Is it going to be another crypto asset such as Sol, or are we going to see the ETH ETFs allowed to distribute staking
I would
rewards?
bet we see some sort of formal process start. And so right now we have applications out there for Sol, ETH, Sol, Ripple, Litecoin. Actually, there's a live application from a Hashdex that I assume will be approved some point in the very near future for the holds multiple coins. But yeah, I think we're going to see those single assets. We also don't have in-kind create redeem on these ETFs. I'm expecting that to happen within a year or two. I mean, no matter what,
That's a good point.
Even if they replace the SEC commissioner, I mean, I don't remember exactly when Gensler came in, but it was like June of the year. So like we could, even if Trump moves as quickly as possible, like the SEC isn't going to get a new commissioner for 8 months from now, potentially. I mean, theoretically, you can get an interim one. Maybe that tests a purse, who knows? But they're not going to do any like huge, big movements, I wouldn't think, based on how I know things operate. So, yeah, I don't have big thoughts. I would say Solana would probably be the next ETF to expect.
Well,
Solana and Ripple.
Some of the considerations are, one, the surveillance rules, right? That's do you have another exchange, and on the derivative side, and Solana doesn't have a futures contract yet. I expect we'll see that.
The problem is that's not technically required. So that's just the precedent that this SEC admin and the prior SEC admin has set. And really, there's no like SEC rule, official rule that says this needs to happen. It's just been precedent for them approving things in the past. And theoretically, if you just there's plenty of commodity ETFs that have been approved in the past that had nothing that would satisfy that. We have Vietnam ETFs where we don't have surveillance sharing agreements over like the equities that trade there and things like that. So there's other things that happen. So theoretically, it could happen without that. But even still, even if say it comes in we'll call it April, really early, or May, and somebody decides to file, or somebody even files like next week, you got 260 days before you even get an approval. So like we're talking way out into we're looking into the second half of 2025 before any new ETFs launch. And that's assuming there are no roadblocks held up, which I wouldn't count on. So it'll happen. It's just, I don't know exactly when. It depends how aggressive and things move, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, Solana's next in line then.
So basically, plenty of time for front running, basically.
That's true. So would it need new regulation around the definition of whether Solana is a security or not? I think that's the biggest hurdle.
And I think right now, if you look at it, the SEC and the CFTC have been infighting over this exact topic on every different digital asset out there, on whether it's security or commodity. And maybe you get like actually somebody in there that's not being, isn't on a leash with Elizabeth Warren, being told what to say and what to do and how strict to be about like what these things are. And you can get some rulemaking. I mean, there's plenty of proposed bills from the legislative branch. So you look, the Republicans are going to have the Senate again. All of a sudden you get some sort of like market structure bill that delineates what's a security and what's a commodity. You get some rulemaking. Like there's a lot of things. It's just not something that's going to happen immediately. Like I feel like some people think like Trump's going to come in on January 20th and all this is going to be done in like two months. It's going to be done. But even day one. But that's not the way government works. Even if you have Elon Musk and Trump running the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, and getting that regulation through will take a long time because they're going to have a lot of other things to worry about. And one thing we saw with the Supreme Court, just I think it was this year, wasn't it? It decided that the SEC can't make sweeping rule changes. So even if we get Hester Peirce on day one, hopefully, she probably wouldn't have her hands tied as to how much she can change. Again, just getting some of the current actions off the table, that would be a good enough start.
Chris Giancarlo could be the nominee. Chris Giancarlo, former CFTC commissioner. So you need someone like that understands the commodity side as well as the security side and digital assets, can interact with policymakers. Like that would be one of the home run picks.
Yeah, I've heard Heath Tarbert is a front runner as well, and he's now at Circle, which would sort of close the circle, if I may, as to bring in stablecoins into the regulation.
I mean, fun fact: Gensler did run the CFTC back in the 2000s, so he has that experience you wanted. So be careful what you wish for.
Well, I mean, it's a squandered opportunity. I mean, like, as you pointed out, James, I mean, the issue that the DNC is facing this morning is that essentially their messaging in part and policy certainly was captured by the progressive wing led by Elizabeth Warren and the anti-crypto army, and that did not play well. By the way, it's broader than digital assets. You know, it's true for the banking category, small. But there's a lot of folks that clearly, like, Trump won the popular vote, not just the Electoral College. So the DNC failed to read the room at a very fundamental level. And there's an interesting question around, did the media believe their own stuff? Like, what happened there? How did those bubbles pierce? So I'm curious to hear your take, James. What do you think happened?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% think the mainstream media were fighting their own. They were, I don't know, they said everyone on Twitter was in their own bubble. Mainstream media was in their own bubble. I think a lot of the mainstream media types tend to be, I mean, you live in New York City, you live in Washington, D.C., like you're in all these like more liberal, progressive states, and you're around all the same people. Many have master's degrees in journalism, and you have like a very similar background. And I feel like I'm not the first person to say this, the mainstream media is just kind of out of touch with like everyday Americans for the most part. And it's pretty clear that that's the case here. That's my personal view. Obviously. Yeah.
I think it's absolutely true.
Also, the mainstream media needs access to the establishment. That's where they get their interviews. That's where they get their stories. That's where they get some of their advertising dollars. They need that access, and that is what closes them off to what's going on. That also is what makes them very eager to drink the establishment Kool-Aid that they're handed. And I think Ron raises a really important question. What happens now? Do we start to see bankruptcies in some of the mainstream media organizations as advertising revenue dries up? What happens to, the very well-meaning journalists they have working for them? Does this lead to an explosion of creativity, or does it lead to centralization somewhere else?
Gemini is a crypto exchange with tools for all traders. Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss founded Gemini in 2014 and have been pioneers for the crypto industry for over a decade. Fun fact, they submitted the first spot Bitcoin ETF application and were one of the first exchanges to receive a trust license in New York. Gemini operates with a security-first mentality, from being a licensed full reserve exchange and custodian to offering leading security features like passkeys. Gemini continues to set the bar for compliance and innovation. Head over to gemini.com/unchained and start trading to earn $15 in Bitcoin.
I do want to say on this, I think is very, very important. And I want to link it back to what we were talking about at the beginning. The market were pricing in somewhere around 50-50. It was a coin toss. It was not just, the crypto guys were way more bullish, was not 50-50 for us, but for everybody else was 50-50, which means positioning was 50-50.
Polymarket was more.
Polymarket, yeah, that's us, right? That's a point.
Maybe it's not
us.
though. Maybe it's losing other crowds. Maybe that's global crowdsourcing. Maybe we underrated Polymarket. Polymarket, even last night, was sniffing out the election win for Trump, while the media had not been polling elections.
Let's say it was 60-40 or 62-38. Let's say you're right. I think you may be right. I would lean in between because it's a very liquid market. But let's say you're right. and we had something priced in of 60-40. What that means is that a seismic change doesn't get priced in overnight, or in my humble opinion, in 2 weeks. It's too big. That's why elections they're not a Bitcoin ETF. They're very hard to price in. So I think this keeps on going till the year end. And one should be, the stress for people here should not be, are we going to pull back, but should be, am I long enough?
I'd agree with that.
I think that matters a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And again, it's not just the regulatory overhang being lifted. There's the macro considerations, which we have not even got a glimpse of what's coming down the pipeline there.
So this was linked to the media thing, right? I agree with what you guys were saying, that there's some sort of, we were talking about this before we started the stream, by the way, that it's kind of like not only that they push in some cases, some people in the audience are going to push back, but they push a false narrative. But it's also the fact that many of them actually, they believe what they're saying. It's not just all make believe. They already made themselves believe.
Yeah, and they're well-meaning. They're not bad people.
Well,
they just drank certain Kool-Aid and are convinced they're right.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, there's a general anxiety that's been hanging over the population. That term of art that's being used is vibecession. I think we're actually in a Goldilocks economy. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. It doesn't mean inflation isn't going higher. It doesn't mean that people aren't working 2 jobs. But Goldilocks doesn't mean that. Goldilocks means our earnings going up at the consumer level, the corporate level, is there access to credit, is the economy growing? That's what Goldilocks means, and that's constructive for risk assets. And now you saw the VIX melt away today. Several points have been elevated to 20%, 20 level for weeks, despite indices being near all-time highs. That anxiety is melting away, right? The clouds are lifting, the blue skies appearing, the rays of light are shining down. So I agree. I think overall, leaving aside the near-term kind of tactics, this is a risk-on environment. I would say the Mr. Market was sniffing out this window. Financials were up yesterday. Before the election, every category of the market was green. The dollar strength was showing. Dollar up is a Trump bump phenomenon. Financials is squarely Trump because financials and banks have less regulatory capital requirements under a Trump regime. So they're highly sensitive. Look at Axos Bank. That's the bank that were Trump banks, up 20% today, by the way. But other banks yesterday and Monday were also going up. I bought Flagstar Bank. That's run by Steve Mnuchin, former Treasury Secretary of Trump. That was my kind of Trump play there. But so, yeah, the market was sniffing this out. And I believe the DNC just failed to read the room, didn't understand reality. My speculation is that after Biden had the terrible debate with Trump, and this is an anecdote I've heard from someone in the kind of DNC circles, might be accurate, might not be, but it kind of makes sense to me. They say, look, you can go out the soft way or the hard way. The soft way is, you have a successor, you step back. The hard way is 25th Amendment. And the 25th Amendment requires majority of the cabinet and certainly the VP. Now, when it came to that conversation, who are the eligible people in that room that could be a successor? They're going to say, well, who would replace Biden? That conversation is going to come up before they rug pull Biden. And only 2 people. It would be Kamala Harris or Buttigieg. And Kamala Harris is a VP, could be presiding over the cabinet, and it would be a continuation of the electoral strategy of Biden in terms of the base that they were focusing on and people of color and DEI and all the rest. So I think that's what got us where we are, the lack of a process to have competitively fielded candidates. I talked to a VC in New York this morning. He said, and this is not a statement I don't necessarily make or not, but I'm just pointing out that he said, the DNC put forth the only 2 people that could lose to Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. I mean, it's like Trump has lots of negatives too. But it was, I think the approach of the campaign, bad campaign manager, bad VP pick, a leader that hasn't been stress tested in political battle and failing to engage with social media and choosing to go on SNL instead of the All In Pod or Joe Rogan, and display dynamism, decisiveness, and kind of show authenticity in personality. Trump has some policies that aren't realistic, like replacing income tax with tariffs or deporting millions of people. They're just not. But they're clear and people can understand them, and therefore they're authentic and they know what they're getting. And with candidate Harris, I still don't know. The only things I know about candidate, like, I know that there's going to be a tax on unrealized gains. Okay, I got that one. I think a lot of people heard that
Thank
one.
you.
What else? And Israel and Gaza is not clear. It's like, hey, yeah, the protesters, we hear you, but Israel, we got your back. Okay, well, which one is it? So I think that the DNC really fumbled this in a significant way. Anyway, so I wrote a post last night at 5:30 p.m. saying, here's the postmortem for the DNC before any elections were called. And if you looked at the electoral data, you could see that this was going to be a major Trump victory just based on turnout. It was all in the public data.
As soon as the data started coming in from Florida and some of the even deep red states, deep blue states, and the shift, I mean, these stats I have on the screen right now are like some of the craziest stats. I'm from Jersey. It's always been blue. My entire life, it's been blue. It hasn't even been close. She only won Jersey by 4 points. I mean, these numbers are absolutely staggering when you look at them. Like these, New York, she only won by 12 points. I mean, it's honestly kind of insane. I feel like there's something wrong here. So it kind of goes to what you're talking about, Rob.
Well, underperformed. Yeah, she underperformed in every swing state, and the message was muddled. It was, hey, I'm the next generation candidate, but also there's no daylight between me and Biden. So is it a continuation or is it a change? And then she would say, well, I'm not Joe Biden. Is that a reference to like gender, or what does that mean then? Right? What does that mean? I don't know.
What do you think, Ron, what do you think the Democratic Party should do now?
I think a few things. One is the progressive wing carry them over the edge. I think that DEI and the woke stuff is not center America. I think Americans are meritocratic. They believe in competition. They also believe in rule of law. Look, there are legitimate criticisms of Trump around January 6th. And instead, I got a funny text from another VC, messaged me this morning. I'll read this out loud to you. So it's a fictional conversation between two Democrats. It says, Dem 1 in 2021, Trump just unleashed an insurrection and proved that he is an existential threat to democracy. We cannot allow him to return to the office. Dem 2, great point. We have to stop that threat. So let's govern hard left on DEI, culture, and immigration for the next 4 years, spend $1 trillion and on stimulus and get inflation going, and then do an undemocratic bait and switch to a DEI hire. This is their words, not my words. Anyway, that is not competent. Now, I mean, I think it was a failure to read the room, failure to understand the basic realities. It's a repudiation to lose the popular vote.
Yeah, but how do you think they can recover that? What should they do to make next election somewhat more interesting?
Politicians love power, and politics are competitive. Look, the Republican stance on immigration has kind of flipped from the 80s where they are now, right? So Silicon Valley was pro-blue before, now it's red. You know, there was the Southern Democrats in the 60s during the Civil Rights era. They flipped Republican. So political parties are highly competitive. They will adjust their positioning. There's no doubt about that. And they will field more competitive candidates that are battle-tested, come through a primary process. But I think you're going to see less of this progressive wing that on culture and on policy isn't something the vast majority of Americans can relate to or identify with. Just I think so. You will see competitive elections. Remember, after Obama won, I think there was some commentary around you'll never see a Republican get elected again. Well, that didn't happen, right?
He just won the popular vote.
You know, right? These markets are dynamic, and politicians are dynamic, and they will all adjust. I mean, Trump is Republican. Republican Party is supposed to be the market of free trade, right? So policies adjust. People will they'll all adjust. And I think the Democrats will get toward the center, which is good. That's good for America.
The number of high-profile Democrats, including Trump himself, that moved to the Republican Party.
Right. I think how you campaign changes. I think every candidate from here on out will be on the Joe Rogan show. That is going to be the new thing. It's not 60 Minutes anymore. It's not CNN and Fox News. The must-do is you got to be on Joe Rogan, and you got to be on the All-In Pod, and not recognizing the reality that content's consumed via social media and shared socially. Investing is a social process. Politics is a social process.
Comes back to the media discussion, the business models going forward.
We just got a question here that I think is interesting from the audience saying, why isn't anyone asking how Biden got 20 million more votes in 2020? Which is an argument. I mean, I don't know if you could be asking that question being on either side of the spectrum politically. But it's mostly being asked by those on the left. And there is actually, surprisingly to me, people claiming there may have been election fraud, because otherwise you can't explain such a big gap. And the answer, I think it ties up exactly to what Ram was saying before, which is Kamala Harris was not battle tested in the primaries by the people. She was thoroughly unlikable for way too many people, even more than Trump, which is remarkable because a very large number of people dislike Trump. So that's the point. She's dislikable. I think that's what happened. Nobody wanted to vote for her.
I don't think she was as disliked as Trump. I just don't think as many people liked her. She's just more like in the middle. Like Trump, people have serious vitriol for
lukewarm.
Trump. I don't really get the same vitriol for Harris. It's just that there's not the opposite, the adornment. I mean, it still boggles my mind that people are like driving around every day with like a Trump flag on the back of their pickup truck in New Jersey and like all this stuff. It's a little weird to me.
Trump he's popular and has enthusiasm, obviously popular vote, right? Turnout was high, but his messaging was around deregulation, controlling inflation, ending wars, right? Very clear messaging. And the Democrat policy, again, the only ones I heard that were very clear is tax the rich and raise taxes on unrealized gain. By the way, the thing about Americans is everyone hopes to one day be an entrepreneur and create wealth. So that messaging doesn't really resonate. And if you're a low information voter, all you hear is taxes go up. So a friend of mine, he's a manager of a bakery. He's a Democrat, by the way, wanted to vote Harris. And I said, well, what about your employees? Like 8 or so employees, minimum wage, low income, low information voters, by the way. Every single one of them, Trump. I think that is related.
And this is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this comes down to the immigration question as well. Immigrants are not necessarily going to vote Democrat. They want to get rich also.
Yes. Yeah. Look, I agree. And the other thing, I spoke to a buddy of mine from Indian descent, and he doesn't relate to Kamala Harris. Think about like identity politics. I don't think identity politics goes out the door. I personally would hope to. I hope that people can relate to one another as a human being, as an individual, with a set of values and interests that you choose, that you can enter into a voluntary arrangement with other people. But I don't think that goes out the window. But that is, I think, also what hurt the DNC here. It is, you're seeing shifts in every of these demographic groups going towards Republicans by appealing to a different set of interests, like deregulation and controlling inflation, all the rest. Bread and butter issues, as opposed to abstract policies like the CHIPS Act. I'm not talking about the merits of those policies, and I think CHIPS Act is actually a waste of money. Intel doesn't need the money, whatever. But like the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, that doesn't land for people. The inflation still 3%, right?
Wait, Alex, you didn't answer your question before. Do you have an answer on what you think happened with the 20 million? Like I heard it was going to be record turnout, but the number seems to be low.
She just was not. People were not voting for her. Period. I wanted to say something else on the election, which is what I think a lot of people got wrong. Was this discussion that a very large percentage of America cares deeply and more than anything about abortion and the whole abortion issue, which is a very valid issue. And that would drive an incredible record turnout among women. And my argument was that that may be true. It makes sense. However, what is most important is the economy, because inflation has been wild. And even though in real terms, adjusted by inflation, the wages and the income of, actually, ironically, narrative validation of people or of poor people, of people, low class people, actually, the wage increases have actually beat inflation. Yeah, it's actually people under Biden are better off. However, they're not aware of it because
That's
the
true, too.
masses tend to think in nominal terms. It's too difficult to adjust everything by inflation, so they feel that everything went to shit, and that's why they were for Trump, for change.
Yeah, the Fed may focus on the PCE, but the CPI is what sets consumer expectations of inflation. And 3.2 for core, that's nowhere near acceptable.
But yeah, it's such a delicious point you raise there, right? Like real incomes have gone up for the low income. I think part of it is like, are you advocating for us or are you advocating for them? And Trump is very good at creating those polarities and leaning into them as a politician. That's part of it.
Yeah. Another narrative violation I'd like to share is, and this is this argument is very pro-Democrat. So I'm going to actually, for the record, state that I'm exactly the opposite. So I'm expressing an argument that goes against my position and interests. Is the following: the main reason the U.S. had such massive, like insane record immigration, illegal immigration numbers, accounting for almost 50% of all new jobs created in the last 2 years, which is absolutely insane, is not really about diminished controls on the border. That matters, definitely matters, but that's not the main key. The key is not the main issue. The main issue is that the U.S. has been growing so strongly, more than other countries, pushing wages up due to basically simple supply and demand imbalance on the labor force. So if you are an illegal or not a potential illegal, somewhere in Latin America, and you look up and you hear from your family that things are so well up there, you figure out a way to cross. And now that the job market has been going back in balance, illegal immigration should dramatically reduce, even if nothing happens on the border. That's the argument. You guys can disagree. I'm actually curious if you have thoughts on this.
I do not have complex thoughts on this. I'm not going to touch that hot button topic.
It's a really interesting. I know, Alex, you and I spoke about this a few months ago. The influx of immigration also helped to reduce labor inflation, by the way, number one.
Yeah,
number two,
very good, actually.
Right. Number two, softened and reduced recession risk as well. Right. The GDP is a product of two numbers, labor, then labor productivity. If the left-hand equation is going up, then GDP is probably going up. If people are productively employed and working. Now, I'm not trying to make a statement around gangs and Colorado and drug and all this stuff. Like, this is a complex topic, obviously, right? But one of the things that a lot of economists are trying to sort out is, why was there no hard landing in October 22? Right? The yield curve was inverted, CRE was falling apart, bank credit growth had come to a standstill. And one of the interesting theories, well, look, you had this massive influx of immigration as a policy lever alongside fiscal spending and monetary policy. I think that's legitimate. If you have 1 million people coming in, it's like 2 million people, 3 million people coming in. Let's say half of them are gainfully employed. It's 1.5 million people at an income of times $40,000 GDP, making up a number, right? Some would be above, some would be low. You know, that is billions of dollars, tens and tens of billions in stimulus. So it's it's complicated at the very least, right?
I think it becomes clear in hindsight, but back in 22 we were not talking about this.
Well, what we don't know is what was the reasoning behind the relaxation of the immigration controls. You know, Elon Musk is saying, well, they're going to come in, legalize them, and then flip swing states to red states. right? That's one argument. Or was it around policy related, or like what was that thinking? We don't know, but it's a super interesting question, which ultimately came back to hurt them at the end.
It's a question other countries are following as well. I'm based in Europe, as we mentioned earlier, and in Europe, the immigration issue, which has generally immigrants have been welcomed with open arms on the whole. I remember I'm in Madrid, and not long ago, our big post office, which is a gorgeous building downtown, had a big banner saying "Refugees welcome." But now the mood has shifted, and part of that is, one, to do with the economic environment. There just aren't that many jobs to go around, and we're teetering on the brink of a recession. But two, the political tone set by the United States does have repercussions around the world on such big issues, such as borders.
Tourism stuff in Madrid now? Or am I making that up? Anti-tourism? Like, isn't there a whole bunch of anti-tourism? Oh, Barcelona.
It's Barcelona. That's Barcelona. We welcome tourists.
Okay,
Everyone should
I'm
come to
sorry. I'm
Madrid,
sorry.
as long as you're nice tourists.
Madrid is gorgeous. Interesting question would be like, supposing the Dems had kept tight borders, would the economy have had a sluggish recovery, so they would have lost anyway? Right? So like, we don't know the counterfactual there either. Like, what was the best hand to play over time?
Yeah, very good point.
Now, you drop $1 trillion in stimulus, by the way. 2 came under Trump. That last package came under the Biden administration, which was not necessary, clearly. Hindsight 2020. Had they not done that, would that have led to lower inflation? Sure. Right? But it's it's easy to quarterback looking backwards.
Yeah. And then there's the demographic issue. The demographic issue of people, if the natural population is declining, you have to import the workforce.
Right. Most countries in the world want to be in the United States' shoes, to be importing, right? China's losing millions of their most talented people to other countries, including the United States, every year. They want to flip that position with us. We're importing talent and capital from around the world. The difference is that we're not selecting that talent through a legal process. That's the issue, of course, right? But
I was going to say, Noelle, I'd be very curious if you could share with us, as Irish, any views of your country that this is going through such a remarkable transformation in the last 15 years, right? And I don't know that many people know about it.
It actually is. It is astonishing. A lot of it is to do with regulations, a regulation-driven boom, which is fairly rare these days, especially for Europe. Normally, Europe's heading in the other direction, but make life friendly for large tech companies. And because you are in the European Union and mainly English-speaking, you get the large American tech companies setting up shop, building smart cities, that kind of thing. That drove the initial boom. But then you have the issue of rising property prices, and you start to get the young people annoyed because they can no longer afford to live in the cities. And then you also have the immigration problem because the immigrants are attracted by the booming economy. And so Ireland is not quite in as happy a place as it was. I have to caveat that with saying I am Irish, but I've never actually lived there, grown up in a lot of other places, but it's more a state of mind kind of thing. However, I do have family that lives there, and while they're fine, they're happy, they can afford an apartment for them and the baby. Other young people, and we actually see unrest. I mean, riots on the streets of Dublin. That's unheard of.
All right, let's go on to some of the House and Senate stuff. This is from Stand with Crypto's website. Basically, we got 257 pro crypto representatives and 17 pro crypto Senate members were elected in this thing. And I'm just going to read off some stats. So we're at 253 and counting, 257 and counting, I guess. I'm not sure how high that number can go. Bipartisan pro crypto majority in the House with dozens of races left to call. There are 0 new anti-crypto candidates that were elected last night. 88% of the newly elected senators are pro-crypto, hailing from both sides of the aisle. And 75% of the 355 pro-crypto candidates running for federal office have already won, and there's still more to go. So, I mean, this has been an astounding success for, Fair Shake, Stand with Crypto, anybody who was putting money into these elections for crypto. And honestly, I think this is one of the biggest mistakes. I mean, maybe this is bias from all of us on this call. We're obviously involved in crypto, but one of the biggest own goals in the entire election over the last 3 years, we'll say, maybe 4, is Elizabeth Warren and her anti-crypto army, the way the SEC went about this whole thing. I mean, it just aggravated people with a lot of money, a lot of influence that just saw this as just petty and stupid. And here we are, and they're reaping the rewards of what they did. So we didn't really talk about this, but I think crypto and anti-tech and anti-growth is one of the things that really came back to hurt the this year.
It's not just Harris. Like, mainstream media has underestimated the amount of wealth that exists in the digital asset industry. They assume that it's something like DraftKings, and look, crypto is about speculation. Like, no one's denying that. Yes. Okay. That's what it's about. Sure. Now, but they've underestimated the amount of wealth and influence that this category has. My business, Limited Wealth, is premised on that, by the way. We're still the only wealth manager in town, which is great.
But also, it's reading the room, like you said earlier, Ram. They did not read the room. What do you gain by being anti-innovation? Crypto, especially those, all of us with good faith in crypto, we're happy to follow rules, just tell us what they are. The anti-immigration army railing against progress does nothing but transmit a bunker mentality, which generally doesn't win votes when things are going well.
There's a hand played after the collapse of FTX and SBF where they had to wash their sins away from taking money in from SBF.
CYA, right?
Correct. And they had to run in the opposite direction and overextend to make up for that, which is really fun. Yeah. Remember, the Dems were actually, and Maxine Waters, who's the head of the House Financial Services Committee at that time, Sherrod Brown, who was voted out, right? So, money does influence politics. And it was an interesting ricochet. They made the wrong bet. They thought that crypto was dead as an industry in the wake of FTX. That was the bet they made, and it was a wrong bet.
Yeah, I would say another thing a wrong bet they made was, the Biden admin completely shafted Elon Musk with his electric vehicle. Like, they had an electric vehicle panel, and they didn't even include Elon Musk or anyone from Tesla in that. And I feel like that was just another own goal. Like, there was no reason for that. And I feel like, I don't know how much it actually contributed to Biden to Musk going all in on Trump. But that's another own goal that the Dems, there's a lot of own goals here.
That's a really good. What if Elon Musk hadn't bought Twitter? What impact might that have had on the election? I don't know if it'd be decisive or not.
I think he would have been censored. That's that, because he still had the big account and the reach, and something that people debate, that maybe he tweaked the algos to increase the presence 100%. Of his tweets in everybody's feeds.
He definitely did that. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
But does anyone mind? I mean, fine.
I think I'm with James on that. Of course he did. There's reporting on
every
that too.
Every time I open my thing, his tweet's right at the top. There's no way that's not designed. There's no way.
He's even talked about that on the Joe Rogan show. He was like, "Oh, well, I used to do this. I'm in tune with the algorithm, and I used to get interactions like this." And
he probably wrote it. Yeah. But again, if that's the worst, then it's not that bad, and he's entertaining. Well, at least. But yeah, would it have been better for him, as Alex very astutely points out, would it have been better for him to not have bought it and instead have been kicked off?
It's an incredible amount of power he wields, right?
Yeah.
Running X. And the question is, do you want your guy or gal to run X if they're on your side? And, the reason why we created a republic here in the United States is to have rule of law so that the law is applied. And that, it's still an interesting question how you think about all of this, right? Like, here's a question for Elon Musk. Did he elevate or promote tweets that were pro-Trump? I don't know. So I'm just interesting. If he believes that, if Elon Musk said this will be the last election, if it goes towards the Dems, that's what he's saying, right? If he believes that, wouldn't it be rational? And he's an incredibly rational person, to put his thumb on the scale and try to inflate. Would he not, right?
I strongly think that without Elon doing what he did, he literally went all out. He risked everything, I think.
He got the Amish to vote, right? Did you guys know about this?
He literally risked everything. Without him, we wouldn't have won.
There were
Trump.
prominent Dems talking about the fact that we need to stop once this election is over and Harris wins, they need to like cut the contracts with Musk's company and like all these other things out there, which is just insane on its face. But like the fact that like he did what he always does. He tends to just lean into one thing, and he's put a lot of time, money, and effort into PA, and it was a pretty slim margin, but not as slim as the pollsters were suggesting. And who knows how much impact he actually had? But the answer is it's definitely the impact was not zero, as far as I'm concerned.
There's a broad swath of disaffected people that were upset. I mean, private equity, in the capital, a lot of people are upset. The Amish were upset. The Amish felt the long arm of God. There were billboards.
Yes,
billboards that the Amish paid for them. Right. And 100,000 of them voted. And what was the margin of victory in Pennsylvania?
I don't even know.
And I think I went to bed at 10:30 last night. I thought, the campaign would have been concluded around.
It was
then.
like 200K people difference.
All right. The Amish 100,000. That's material. So
180 maybe.
I think it's an interesting question around Musk. Was it, it's the alternative history stuff is kind of fun, but look, I think there's a broad base of people that were just very disaffected with the current administration, and they wanted a change.
I go back to like what you were talking about with inflation. There's a lot of people out there and a lot of jobs. Yes, the average person was better off, but there were plenty of people whose incomes did not rise above the level of inflation or at the rate of inflation. And even they were just upset with what Biden did to the economy, even if it wasn't Biden's fault. Even if we take a step back, and you could argue that some of it, like a lot of it, probably wasn't completely his fault. He did I would argue he did a lot of good things, but it doesn't matter if you're disaffected. Like you're just not going to be happy. If you look, like when people try to predict elections, one of the things they look at is like inflation. How have people felt about the economy? And like if they felt crappy about the economy, even if, like you were saying, we're in a Goldilocks thing, it doesn't really matter if he actually created a Goldilocks economy. If people felt like their dollar wasn't going further, yada, 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 and many people, it actually wasn't, those people are probably not going to vote for you again.
Yes. I agree. First off, like on the vibe matters, and the leadership sets the vibe, sets the tone, right? You think I wasn't around when Reagan was running for office, but I've always been told about this sunny, shining city on the hill speech, like this legendary speech about delivering optimism. And what you saw after the victory is at least I saw on X, are videos and reels of rockets going up into space and entrepreneurship and celebrating founders and innovation. And that's a story that attracts people. It's a dynamic story, as opposed to a story around identity politics. That sub 30 crowd, here's another thing, that student loan debt relief program, it pissed off people that actually vote. People don't forget that. People 60 plus, they vote the most. And I think something under 30, that's only 10% of the electorate. And half of them apparently voted for Trump. And they also don't like the DEI stuff, by the way, either.
Yeah, which is really the big winner today really was democracy. And I say this as a non-American, and I don't know how Alex feels about this also, but we saw democracy at work, and it was messy and it was loud, but it worked. The disaffected people were able to vote for change, and we got the result much faster than we expected. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's 100%. I think it's a very, very strong point, because precisely like a very large chunk of this country thinks the opposite way, that this is a victory of a non-democratic party. But this is exactly the opposite. This is the victory of someone who, with a party and a system behind, he went through the democratic process, and they fought, and one side won fairly. And yeah, both sides said a lot of lies, one more than the other, but whatever, it's subjective. Which one was it? But it's also politics. People lie on camera for both, right? Unfortunately.
So we have two more topics before we wrap up here. I agree with I wish we disagreed more. The only thing we disagreed on was the fact that Musk Musk put his finger on the scale for his
Did he have his finger on the scale?
Well, we have a good point, actually. The macro, we're gonna disagree on the macro, I think.
Yeah, I was about to say we have to touch on what's coming tomorrow.
Let's talk about, real quick, let's keep this part short, the fact that, and I'll be the first one to say, I was on here saying I thought that the Polymarket odds were probably leaning a little bit further right than the actual odds are. So we touched on this earlier, but that French whale, which was all over every major news outlet, he was all over Twitter before he got to the major news outlets, and people were saying he was an idiot. The dude just pulled in $48 million on his bets. I mean, he bet on Trump to win the popular vote, which honestly, I personally, I thought Trump was going to win. I would have taken pretty damn good odds that he was going to lose the popular vote. So I'll take the L on that one, the figurative L, because I can't touch this stuff. But yeah, I guess, do you guys have any thoughts on like Polymarket in general, betting odds? I mean, if you look at like from 10 days ago even, and you look at what Polymarket and Kalshi and all these things were saying, which states were going to go which way. I mean, the map is basically what the map has come out to be. I mean, granted, I think Arizona and Nevada still haven't been officially called, but it looks like it's going to be Trump. I mean, if that happens and you look at what the odds were on Polymarket, it lines up exactly. And it just shows, I guess, kind of like efficient markets a little bit. It shows, when people are putting millions of dollars at work, it might mean a little bit more necessarily than pollsters. So, yeah, I guess quickly, what are your guys' thoughts on polling versus betting markets and Polymarket and this French whale?
I can dive into that because I've been talking quite a lot about that recently. And one thing we tend to overlook is that Polymarket is not a poll. I mean, we all know this, but it's important because they're very different questions. Polymarket asks you, who do you think will win, not who are you going to vote for? And that's not the same question at all. Polymarket is a probability platform, a betting platform. There are many other terms we should maybe use rather than a prediction platform, whereas the polls are more about on the ground asking people what their intentions are, not what they think the result will be. Very different. But Polymarket bettors are going to be parsing the polls to place their bets. So it's a cause and effect issue, I think.
Two observations. One is polls are a form of marketing. They're not truth-seeking. You hire pollsters to deliver a certain result to influence a perception. Kamala Harris was at her home last night, not on the front line, because I believe that they saw the conclusion coming. Anyone that looked at the data saw this coming. I had a post again on my Twitter feed, 5:30 p.m. last night, writing the postmortem of the Harris campaign, just on the public data. So that's one. Polls aren't legitimate. Number two is Polymarket is our new source of truth. It's market-driven truth. It's an oracle that we can look to. It got it right. It adjusted in real time based on the data. Is there a slight bias? Maybe. Is there evidence of that? Not really, but I get your theoretical point.
Yeah, I'll take the L on that point though, because it was even strong. Like it turned out even stronger. I'll take the L on that. It probably wasn't leaning right in the way I thought it was, but
we need more betting. We need more event prediction markets to understand truth.
More liquidity.
More liquidity, because if you have to pay for your view, you have to create accountability to have a point of view. If you're going to place a wager, and you're motivated to be correct. And those are not the incentives that you have in traditional media.
Yes. And it makes it easier for us, the mainstream, to see what the experts who are doing the research are thinking.
Also makes it easy for people like everybody, including ourselves, to put a number and visualize what's going on. What am I trying to say with this is that Polymarket, even though it was going against predicted, for example, for large chunks, amounts of time, it was in line with, other Trump trade assets like the long bonds. So there was a big move on bonds on the 10-year and the 30-year. They were aligned.
There was a line. It was financial markets sniffed out the Trump win, right? Yields were going up and dollars going up.
Yeah, what you were saying before. Yeah. So it's not that it was in isolation. You could say actually the bond market was also like saying a 60% Trump probability, right? Or 58, whatever. We can argue about the exact percentage, but it's not just Polymarket. It was financial assets. And if you're a very well-informed trader who arbitrages, you could even be arbitraging what the implied probability is based on the 10-year note or the 30-year bond and Polymarket and basically put it in line to where it should be, right? And the other thought I wanted to say is that in our last pod, right before actually, I had changed my view on I don't know if you recall, James,
Yeah, you
on
said
the
Trump was gonna win.
elections. I decided to put a lot of time into studying polls, and if polls had somehow adjusted for the anti-Trump bias that they had expressed in 2016 and 2020, but not so in the midterms of 2018 and 2022, and I didn't see anything. It was just blah, 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 blah. It's like nothing really fundamentally has changed. So why would we not be expecting again a anti-Trump bias that basically shows up in the count as polls underrepresenting the real Trump vote, which is what happened.
Yeah, and they did say they were going to change, didn't they?
Well, from what I've seen, 37% of pollsters changed the way they did things from 2020.
Yeah, it's not much.
Maybe we'll see something different in 2026 and 2028. All right, let's go on to macro. So for a while, the market has been pricing 25 bips cut tomorrow and another 25 bips cut in December. I'll just say I still think they're going to cut 25 tomorrow. I think December is in serious jeopardy, but we'll see. There's a lot of numbers coming out. I guess I'm not a macro guy specifically, so let's go to you, Alex. Like, what are your thoughts on what's going to happen with the Fed cuts, the FOMC?
25 tomorrow. Likely nothing on December, as you say. That being said, they're both irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right now, it's all about the elections. Worrying about what Powell is going to say, I think it's going to be a lot of very interesting and even fun listening to Powell right after the elections to see if he changes his tune. But it won't really matter because this is so big. So for a very short period of time, forget about the FOMC. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. We were supposed to be disagreeing on this, though, but I can't disagree with you on that. Sorry, I agree. I don't think they should cut 25 tomorrow. There's no indications in the economy that the slowdown is warranting that kind of a move, but I don't think they cannot do so, given the strength of the market signaling the Fed's not going to want to deliver a surprise.
I'm in agreement with Noelle, too. There's no need for a rate cut. Trump's election is equivalent to, I don't know, call it 100 bips in rate cuts because of the knock-on effect to animal spirits, small business enthusiasm. Look at, I bet you $1 to donuts, the NFIB small business survey comes out next month, and it'll be going up. People are going to spend more. CapEx is going to start going. This is why this whole talk of the so-called neutral rate that academics talk about is so misguided. There was a substantial easing that just took place today, and that was reflected in financial markets. We had a repricing in all these risk assets. They'll cut tomorrow because they want to surprise the markets. They shouldn't cut in December, but let's see what they say tomorrow. I mean, to be a fly in the wall in that room, it would be so delicious just the first day.
Yeah.
Just listen, like, what are they talking
about? As the
about?
results are coming in while they're in the meeting, you're right.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can't make this up. But Kevin Warsh will likely be the next FOMC chair. Markets view Trump as inflationary. You know, Druckenmiller put a big short bonds trade after the 50 bips cut in September when it's 3.5%. Actually, I think it was correct. Things that markets don't get is that Kevin Warsh will be more hawkish, and markets won't care about it anyway for months. Markets didn't even care about the election until Monday, by the way. Then markets said, who's going to win? And then things started repricing Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but a lot of the things that Trump is talking about are likely to be rather inflationary. I mean, if he's really going to put on, I mean, I don't actually think he'll put on a 60% tariff, but that might be just a starting point for his negotiations. Who knows what he's actually going to do? But like, his camp is trying to argue that tariffs aren't inflationary, which is like, you just look at the data. That's a bunk argument. That is just not. I mean, yes, maybe it could help like middle class Americans who need those factories and things and like stuff like that. Yes, but it is undoubtedly those are inflationary actions, and the rate cuts he's talking about doing for higher income earners and things like that, the wealthier individuals, likely to be inflationary, at least for asset prices. There's a lot of things that I agree with you, Rob. It's likely to be inflationary. I don't know if I'd say it's equivalent to 100 basis points of cuts, but it's something.
It's something.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
50 bips. It's something.
Yeah.
Something significant.
I'm on I agree with Ram, it's up by 100. And the bond market is telling us that. I mean, we have the 10-year at the highest point in a year. And the 10-year yield started heading up the day of the 50 basis point cut. The bond market started sending us messages back then. And the question is, how long before the stock market starts listening? I think we still got a while to go before the stock market starts listening, but that time will come.
That's actually the only thing I'm fading here. In fact, I started buying long bonds.
That's an interesting idea. I like that idea.
Interesting.
But look, there will be incremental real economic growth. When I'm saying it's more inflation, I don't mean that in a dismissive way. It's part of what you get with higher real economic growth too, right? You're going to see asset price inflation.
Even nominal growth can drive stock prices.
Yes.
So on this, I think it's very important, at least like here, I think we're going to disagree, but the tariffs, which are, I think would be an abomination if he does 60% on China or anywhere near close to that, would be very bad for the US, for growth, for inflation, for everybody. He's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. Same thing happened in 2016. It didn't happen. It happened a little bit. And the way I see it is this is the Trump style. He is very aggressive with words to try to avoid shit going down. So it's a negotiation. Exactly. It's negotiation style, and it's very effective. So that's why I don't see problems on tariffs, and I don't see such a big inflationary problem in the US coming from Trump. I think actually we're going to go and remain in a disinflationary environment. And I'm seeing a lot of people, especially in Europe, extremely concerned about Trump and tariffs, both on research I read, and actually you can see it on the stock market, like Europe is down, right? So like traders are as concerned as analysts. And I think that's the wrong trade. Same thing with China. China is down on Trump overnight. China's coming out with stimulus, finally supposedly announcing their numbers in 2 days. I think it's a fade. I think these fears are going to pass, and in fact, the opposite is going to happen. That Trump is going to push China to do more, which would be good for Chinese markets and risk assets.
Do more what? To stimulus?
Stimulus, yeah.
Interesting. Alex and Ramon and James, your opinions, please, of how high do you think the 10-year yield is going to reach before it turns?
I'm literally not allowed to answer it, so I'll stay out of this one.
That's true. You can't. Yeah. All right, Alex, what do you think?
I don't have a number, unfortunately, but I think not much longer. That's why I started buying. Otherwise,
I agree with Alex too. I think gold broke today, by the way.
Yeah.
So I call that out. Like events change dynamics. We had an event. So if you're going to change the trajectory of the 10-year, today would make the most sense. But if we're wrong, then it's probably 5%, which was the peak in October 26th of last year.
Yeah, and just what Rand is talking about, gold has gone from 2,750 to 2,600. So
yeah, it can afford a correction and still have a really, really good year. I was looking it up the other day. It's very, very rare. I don't even remember the last time this has happened, if it has happened, where you have gold and stocks going up in the same year.
That's a great point. And gold's been beating the S&P like the last 2 years, by the way.
Which is extraordinary.
I don't think that's going to continue there. But by the way, I agree. I think the tariff war issues are probably overblown. It's a tactic for negotiation. Elon Musk will get the tariffs he needs for EVs because he really needs them. Like China EVs are really competitive on the luxury and the entry level. So yeah, China will have no choice but to, spend to, get their economy out of the gutter.
Sorry, I cut you off before, Alex.
And let's see what that does to currencies.
And oil, and yes, exactly.
Alex, what were you going to say before when I cut you off talking about the gold price?
No, I'm good. I mean, you can talk about gold, but not very exciting. It's just mainly strong dollar. I wouldn't be fading right now the dollar. I would give it, like bonds can start now. At least that's what I'm doing. The dollar, it's give it a few weeks. And anyhow, trading the dollar is so boring. Who cares? So it's
I
like,
think the
sorry,
Dow
guys.
is close to turning. I think the Dow and the 10-year probably turn around the same time.
It makes sense. Yeah.
Well, we'll
And
see.
that would be another tailwind for Bitcoin in theory.
And international stocks too, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, how much longer can this 8 percentage point outperformance versus international markets, can large cap US stocks go on? I mean, at some point there has to be a reversion to mean. I just don't know what that catalyst is. We'll see, I guess, at some point, but who knows? I think that's it. Is there anybody have any other macro comments, or are we ready to wrap up?
Vibe session
Yeah.
is over. Goldilocks is here. Goldilocks is here.
I love that. Ram, are you going to get T-shirts made with that?
Yeah, I'll get a hat too.
Good. Oh, well.
Any last minute thoughts, Noelle?
No, just been great talking to you. Seriously, I learned so much from all of you, and it's just so exciting to be able to talk about this at this particular point in history. We're privileged to be able to witness what is unfolding.
Fascinating.
Likewise, a real
All right,
pleasure.
Alex, any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, great having you guys.
All right, Ram, Noelle, thank you very much for joining us. We missed our co-anchor Joe. He had an event with his clients, so apparently clients come first over the Bits and Bips pod. Who knew?
Who knew?
Yeah, the people who write your checks, in a figurative manner of speaking, actually matter. All right, guys, thanks for joining us for this episode of Bits and Bips. We'll be back in 2 weeks to discuss more about how the worlds of crypto and macro are colliding. Until then.